Console, online. HPG connection, online. Educational module, online. All systems, nominal.
Hello, class, and welcome to On the Origin of Battlemechs Podcast, episode 30. Today we are talking about the Toro. I am your host, Brent Stewart McKee. My co-hosts today are...
I'm Joshua.
And I'm Chandler.
And today we're talking about the Toro, which is the first Taurian Concordat design we get to see and talk about, and it is a mech. It is... Honestly, when I saw it, I was reminded of that joke, like, Mom, can we get an archer while we're out? We have an archer at home. The Toro sitting on the front doorstep,
Yeah, it's a little mean to the Toro, but it's definitely got those boxy missile pods and the low-slung central cockpit.
I mean, no offense to the actual design. I'm just saying, this is clearly inspired by the Archer, which is not a bad place to take inspiration from, because the Archer, as I've mentioned before, I love that mech.
Yeah, and the later Toros will be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. This first one that we're going to talk about is a little short-ranged for me, but...
Yeah, so the Taurian Concordat, under the steady hand of Amanda Cauldron and her successors, would enjoy a century and a half of relative peace, relative being the operative word there. Starting in 2425, when the Age of War was at its zenith, this peace was not due to pacifism, as once the Fed sons had their own homegrown battlemech, the Battle Axe. Over the next 2 decades, the Taurian agents would secure technology and information, slowly gathering the pieces of the puzzle to build their own battlemech program. The windfall that allowed them to finally start was when they secured several Capellan Firebees in 2475. The Toro was the first design to be produced and was chosen as the design submitted by Warworks, a government-run company with a pipeline of personnel from the military, and they won, air quotes there, the contract. The official reason given was that the Toro was more stable and reliable than the other submitted designs, but that is questioned by historians.
Yeah, especially when you've got that many key military and intelligence people in your company and it's state-run. There's a lot of incentive to push that system.
Mm-hmm.
Yay, military-industrial complex, yay!
It is a thing, and to be fair, it has always been a thing, but it is much more of a thing in this day and age, and in the Battletech universe.
Yeah.
So the Toro has the design quirks of having a cramped cockpit, and the first one was seen in 2481, the TR-A-1, and its field tests were in 2481, and then the full production started within 2 years. Using the Firebee as a jumping off point as mentioned, they downgraded the engine to use the extra space and tonnage to increase the weapon loadout and armor of the mech. This mech is not intended to go toe-to-toe with other mechs, but to support traditional armor and work in combined arms units. Despite not being the largest or impressive, the Toro would receive many upgrades, keeping it up to standard until the end of the reunification wars. So this guy has a movement profile of 4-6. It's got an SRM-2 in the right torso, an SRM-2 in the left torso, and a large laser in the left arm. And it's got 10 heat sinks, so the integrated ones, and it's got 1 ton of ammo, and all the primitive tech that comes with it being a primitive design. So with just the 2 launchers, you're looking at 25 salvos apiece. That's not bad, and the large laser gives it that nice long reach.
And I think it's important to understand that this mech is not designed to be a standalone piece on the battlefield. That's one reason I like the Taurian Concordat so much. They understand how wars should be fought. It's a combined arms effort, and this guy is designed to fit into that combined arms mentality. He's a piece of the larger whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and being the Concordat's first mech, this isn't a bad, first showing by any means. I mean, it's slow by modern standards, but 4.6 is pretty respectable during the era it was introduced, and it's got a pretty decent punch for that era too, with the large laser and the 2 SRM2s.
Its movement profile allows it to keep up with the tanks. Its large laser gives it tank-like firepower. It's got the SRM2s to deal with enemy infantry and help hit vehicles. Obviously, it's not really what you want in a standalone mech because it's only 35 tons and it's so slow, but as just a part of the battlefield solution, it's a pretty good infantry support. unit.
Yeah, this mech really strikes me as like the linchpin of the unit. Like it doesn't hold everything together, but everyone moves around it. Everyone's supported by it. It supports everyone else. You can't think of it as a single unit. You have to think of it as part of the whole, as you said.
Yeah, and seeing what happens to the Toro with the reunification war, it would have been very interesting to see where this design would have ended up going, assuming it never got discontinued after the reunification war due to the Star League being the Star League and not liking the periphery.
The Taurian Concordat, to my understanding, holds a place in its heart for this mech, even after all this time. So with the actual constituent parts coming together, maybe we'll see a National Pride version 2 Toro come onto the battlefield. That would be kind of neat.
Oh, as part of the reunification of the Taurian Concordat and the Calderon Protectorate in the 3150s.
Yeah.
I would love to see an MML version of this.
An MML version of this would shine, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But this version, while very, very nice, and a very, very good starting point for any state, regardless of periphery or inner sphere, it's got a battle value of 671 and a point value of 20. And I love the way it looks, despite me giving it a hard time about looking like an archer. It's spunky. I love its little, like, diamond triangular armor plates on its arm. It gives it a lot of personality. And the difference of the missile launchers, whereas the archer tends to have the plates come down or open up to the sides, these ones just open straight up. So again, giving it a little more of a personality that is different than the archer.
It's very similar to how the MWO archer opens up. But I like your term for it, spunky, because it does have this kind of determined, I'm going to stand this ground and take you on because it's the right thing to do kind of feel to the artwork.
Oh yeah, I mean, the artwork very much informs that opinion.
It's the little mech that could.
It's the little mech that won't back down.
The little mech that could hold off the SLDF.
If only.
Yeah. So obviously we mentioned it had numerous upgrades, but sadly all of those records were lost to time. And so the next record sheet we have is the TR-A-6, and it is the final upgrade / model to the Toro, and first documented in 2548, and the last model as the SLDF closed and dismantled the manufacturing facility in 2598. This action was taken as part of the SLDF's plan to remove the remaining national pride from the Taurian Concordat. Despite trying to supplement the Taurian Defense Forces with designs in line with the rest of the Star League, this backfired and only cemented the resentment and resistance to the Star League. Once the Taurian Concordat was free, there was a heated debate on whether to rebuild the Toro facilities, but pragmatically they decided not to sink resources into a 200-year-old design, staggered line formations to offset the lack of short-range weapons in this model was a standard tactic and was very effective. The extra ammo was often useful due to the long engagements that the Taurian forces often found themselves in, where most other nations had a more easily resupply system set up.
And I mean, I think it makes complete sense that it backfired. You're telling these people that, hey, your culture is no longer legitimate. We're going to do everything we can to eliminate it. Yeah, how are people going to react to that?
People don't like being told no, so they're going to dig in their heels, whether it be something like prohibition or trying to stomp out a culture. People are going to say no.
Yeah, so the A6, it bumps up the movement to 5.8 as opposed to the 4.6 for the A1.
Mm-hmm.
It still has 10 heat sinks. Everything's bumped up to standards, so no more primitive tech for this guy. It does lose a little bit of armor protection as compared to the primitive tech, but it uses that weight savings to give it a PPC and 2 LRM5s with 2 tons of ammo. So this thing has ammo for days, and it is a ranged mech at this point. It is not a short range mech. It is designed to sit back and lob stuff. And that makes sense with the staggered formation because they can always support each other no matter where the enemy ends up going.
Mm-hmm.
When we say it's got a little less armor, we're talking 8 points of armor.
Yeah. It's very minor amount lost.
And if you're going to be firing at range, the decrease in armor is not going to be that much of an issue because you're going to be moving around, you're going to have your distance modifiers, so the chances of you getting hit are decreased. It still hurts, don't get me wrong, but it completely makes sense. And now that all of your weapon systems are long range, with the PPC having a long range of 18 and the LRM's 21, you don't want to get close. You want to be sitting in a bluff of trees somewhere with a lance mate beside you, and either your lance mates who are in heavier things a little more forward screening you, or your lance mates who are in other Toros behind you, so you can keep leapfrogging either forward or back, giving each other firing solutions and data.
Well, remember, this is not designed as a standalone mech. You're going to have tanks, heavy tanks, that are going to do most of the actual fighting against enemy mechs.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is just there to as part of that.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned before in previous episodes, I believe it was the Fire Bee, how having infantry on the ground being like, hey, this building's giving us some trouble, send a salvo to these coordinates. With the LRMs, he now can do that. So he's much more versatile than with the SRMs.
Yeah, and that's one thing I definitely like about this one, is by ditching the SRMs and going with all long-range weapons, you really allow this to focus on its one part of the battlefield, really solidifying its piece in your whatever grouping of armed forces you have.
It's also very possible there's a lost variant between the 1 and the 6 that's supposed to be like a short range, kind of still taking after the A1 that would be paired with the A6, along with all the tanks and stuff.
Or even a medium range one where, it's got half SRMs and half LRMs.
Yeah, I mean, they probably tried a number of combinations between the 1 and the 6, and the 6 is just the one we still have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything goes through iterations. So it's almost undoubtedly what you guys are just saying, that there's going to be a 2 through 5 in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But the 6 has a battle value of 864 and a point value of 23. And with the SLDF systematically destroying the Toros and doing war crimes while destroying them, very few remain today, and most are historical artifacts and not complete chassis, but parts and fragments.
The mech was reintroduced during the Jihad.
I am more referring to ones from that era.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the SLDF were a bunch of so. But yeah, and as Chandler says, it was reintroduced during the Jihad, because as we've seen, pretty much everybody was scrambling for something they could produce, and the Taurian Concordat was undergoing a sort of cultural shift during that period, kind of like the Capellan reawakening.
I would categorize it as a revitalization.
Yeah, that's a good term for it. A new government, it's a whole subject for a data dive, but a whole government change, a war against the Federated Sons to kind of pull people's attention away from what the new government was doing at home, and that's probably more so the reason they brought this Toro back in that time period, since we know from the TROs that the manufacturing plants for these were destroyed by the SLDF.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's less of like the other ones we've seen, where it's, hey, we have all this old equipment, let's dust it off and use it, and more of a, hey, we are revitalizing our nation, and this would be a great symbol of that.
I find it interesting that even though it was reintroduced during the Jihad by not just the Concordat, but also the Magistracy of Canopus and the Fed Sons, of all people, it didn't end up getting an additional variant. But then again, the A6 is a pretty well-rounded mech. It wouldn't get stuck in with all the high-tech frontline mechs, but it would be a very good second-line and militia mech. And I don't think there'd be anyone being like, I'm not sure if I want that. No, I think anyone, militia or otherwise, that was handed a Toro would be very happy with it.
Yeah, Garrison Pilot is happy to have one of these.
The Taurian Concordat never gave up on its combined arms philosophy, and now they have a whole bunch of, Star League designs, the bug mechs, the standards across the inner sphere to team up with it. So it's not like this guy's got to carry an entire light lance on his own. He can be that fire support mech for a bunch of scouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he just definitely can't be the scout.
Correct.
So, for our pilot profiles today, we have Colonel Red Roy Ferndale, branded a pirate by the SLDF. Roy is a legend, specifically in the Pleiades cluster where he operated. After a long back and forth with the SLDF, Roy was eventually run to ground and captured after an epic 6-week pursuit by the SLDF, where during that time Roy survived in his mech with little to no sleep and taking down 5 Star League mechs before finally being captured and executed in 2595. This, however, did little to pacify the cluster.
Yeah, I think this notable pilot is a call out to Rob Roy, the famous Scottish outlaw and freedom fighter rebel.
That is not a connection I made, but I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
And then our second pilot isn't actually a pilot, it's a mech, Black Bessie. And this is a TR-A-6, the only machine of the first corps to survive the SLDF, relatively intact until the Battle of the Capital, where its gyros locked up. The survivors were able to recover Black Bessie and keep it hidden until the Taurian Concordat was free again. Black Bessie was adopted as a mascot and good luck charm, and she has been enshrined on top of a 185-meter tall pillar in Samantha, and remained there until it was destroyed with the rest of the capital by an asteroid impact.
Word of Blake.
Yeah, using asteroids. I'm not sure if it's explicitly forbidden by the Ares Convention, but I'm pretty sure that's not kosher.
Goes against the spirit, at least.
Yeah, it sounds like a bad time.
Very indiscriminate.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, give this thing maybe endo steel and a pair of MML5s, upgrade the heat sinks to doubles, and put an ER PPC on instead of the PPC, and this thing becomes just crazy good.
Oh, yeah.
Well, crazy good as a fire support light mech.
It is still just 35 tons.
Yeah.
So for our data dive, we are going to go over to Josh.
Yeah, so since we're on the Toro, the totem mech of the Taurian Concordat, we decided to dive into the origins of the Taurian Concordat. They go back to really the whole grain wars and the territorial colonial issues that the Terran Alliance was having. Samantha Calderon, a rich woman from Terra, put together a colony force that was determined to seek a new life away from all of the strife and chaos that was going on as the Inner Sphere started to sort out who it was. The outer reaches and the chaos of the Terran Alliance's disastrous colonial policies, Samantha Calderon fled the planet Isla Chapelle after her husband and 2 daughters were killed by an Alliance firing squad in 2236. Her husband had been one of the chief movers behind a terraforming business started on the planet of Vega, and the funds from that business allowed Samantha Calderon to create this colonial movement. I think the new Battlestar Galactica TV show, everybody fleeing in jump ships and drop ships.
So a second colonial force abandoning Vega, basically.
Yes. Or Isla Chapelle. It's not really clear if she was from Isla Chapelle originally and then went back there after her husband's business on Vega, or if they were on Isla Chapelle the entire time. All we know is that the colonial force left from Isla Chapelle and her husband's terraforming business was on Vega, or terraforming Vega.
Okay.
So in 2250, having gathered 25 FTL capable ships and over 2,300 volunteers, Samantha Calderon and her fleet departed Isla Chapelle, briefly made port at Robinson, Victoria, and New Syrtis, all future Federated Suns worlds, before departing into unknown space. Almost 2 years later, they reached the unexplored edges of the Hyades cluster. The Hyades cluster is a nebula, a stellar nursery, and none of the astronomers had, even at that point, had been able to peer inside those dense gas clouds. And all previous attempts to explore it had disappeared and never returned. It was real here be dragons kind of place.
So definitely a gamble.
Yes, but also definitely somewhere where all the troubles of the Inner Sphere would not likely follow you. The expedition, as they arrived at their first jump point at the Hyades, discovered why nobody had ever returned, And basically it's because, and this is a little scientifically unsound, I think, but blame, the 80s science fiction and the rule of cool. They found that the area was packed with dense gases and asteroids, the gas making it difficult for their sensors to spot the asteroids. And of course, an asteroid running into your ship will do bad things to it. They lost 2 of their Aquila-class transports while they were trying to pass through these asteroid fields at the jump points. And for some reason, maybe it's because the nebula is pushing it away, again, scientifically sketchy here. After they passed through the asteroid barrier at the outer jump points, they discovered that inside the nebula were 8 star systems, all linked within each other's gravitational fields. So not a single solar system with 8 stars, but 8 solar systems or star systems so close together that they're actually moving under each other's gravitational influence.
So like a binary system, except they're all at that sweet spot where they're affecting each other. So they're all moving together, but they're not affecting the rotation of the planets or anything like that.
Correct. Or the planets have reached stable orbits between them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like a binary system, if there were 8 stars in a binary system. So inside these 8 stars, moving through this complex gravitational soup, were 37 planet-sized bodies, some of which had stable orbits around one star. Quite a few, however, kind of bounce around almost like a pinball, like they orbit one star for a while, and then the gravity of another star picks them up, and then they move into that orbit. So it's a really crazy and complex.
So kind of like how, what is it? Uranus and, no, not Uranus. It's 2 of our planets will switch orbits every so often.
Pluto and Uranus.
It is Uranus, right?
Yep.
Okay, so it's like that, except instead of switching spots, they're switching stars.
Yes. I think if anybody's familiar with the Firefly TV show and the Serenity movie, the map that they show of the Firefly universe is a lot like the 8 stars in the Hyades cluster that the Taurian Concordat calls home.
Okay. So just kind of this like neat little nexus oasis hidden in a gas cloud.
Yep. So they left Isla-Chapelle in 2250, and it took them almost 2 years to reach the Hyades cluster. However, by the new year 2253, so 3 years, Samantha Calderon set foot on the planet Taurus, named after her second husband, Victor Torrens, who had perished during the initial penetration of the Hyades asteroid field. He was apparently key in charting a course through the asteroids at the outer jump points, possibly was on one of those 2 Aquila-class transports that were destroyed.
It appears Samantha doesn't have a lot of luck in her love life.
Or she is lucky in her love life. Her husbands are not so lucky in surviving.
I guess it's a matter of perspective.
I mean, she's finding love.
You're not wrong there.
And, one gets killed by an Alliance firing squad, one gets killed charting a path through a dense asteroid fields. They both sound like good, morally sound men who will die for their beliefs and die to protect others. So,
at the very least, they sound like proactive people, which is something I can get behind.
Taurus proved to be a planet rich in natural resources, including a really good soil for planting Terran crops. And for 15 years, from 2253 to 2268, Samantha Calderon's dream of idyllic isolation beyond the reach of governments and social oppressors was a reality. The asteroid field and the dense clouds of gas protected the colony from the prying eyes of Alliance bureaucrats and monetary meddlers, and the original colony of some 2,300, possibly more if there were children born on the way, soon doubled in size. However, in March of that year, 2268, Samantha Calderon died in a freak accident, and her death forced the Taurians to rethink their position, which would cause them to lay down a government that would last until, it never ended, so it's not really an until.
There is some form of this government still in existence today.
Yeah, this original government would last until the SLDF stamped its boot across the face of humanity in the 2500s. And there's not a lot between here and the War of Cameron Aggression, also known as the Reunification War. Did we want to go into the Reunification War?
I think we'll cover the Reunification War as its own thing, because it affected everybody, but it affected everybody differently. And so it's probably going to be one of those where we look at it over a couple episodes specifically, what was it like in the Terran hegemony at the time? What was it like in the successor states at the time? And what was it like in the periphery at the time? Spoiler, not good.
Yeah, okay, so a few little things that we can infer from TRO entries and other non-directly sourced material. The Taurian Concordat created a very much Age of Enlightenment form of government, society inspired by John Locke, Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin, and they had grown from Taurus into multiple worlds inside the Hyades cluster, and then eventually they jumped beyond the Hyades cluster and came in contact with a number of other far-flung colonial worlds that did not have an allegiance to a larger nation and established trade routes. This led to the formation of the Taurian Concordat later on, about 100 years later, and the Taurian Concordat would actually be a beacon of peace and stability, achieving most of its goals through diplomacy and trade, establishing high degrees of freedom, education, and standards of living, especially for the periphery. But their education system was actually so much better than their neighbors that the only nation who had an education system that produced as highly educated people as the Taurian system did was the Terran hegemony itself. And a number of their educational reforms were actually adopted by the Federated Suns in an effort to improve literacy in the Suns.
I mean, that is high praise.
Yeah.
And as we know, when you look at history, the more people, ideas, and products travel across borders, the less likely troops will.
Mm-hmm. And that's what helped while the rest of the Inner Sphere was wrecking itself during the Age of War. That's really one of the things that helped the Taurians stay free, is that trade and the ability to reach out to their neighbors and create mutually beneficial arrangements. That, and then the Inner Sphere being busy kicking the crap out of itself, made the periphery a secondary concern. But they actually developed a very strong naval shipbuilding technology and infrastructure, exporting numerous warships to the Magistry of Canopus. I believe they even sold them to the Rimworld Republics, but they were selling, I think it's the Winchester heavy cruiser was sold to numerous periphery powers. They had the Wagon Wheel and at least one other major warship design produced before the Cameron War of Aggression. And yeah, almost 300 years of mostly peaceful trade, innovation, and growth before the House Cameron decided the Inner Sphere needed to be brought under the rulership of Terra.
Mm-hmm.
Good old Terra.
And I think most governments today could only hope for 300 years of peace and stability, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it was quite an impressive feat, especially for this universe.
Yeah. So where are they now?
So we mentioned the asteroid attack on Taurus during the Jihad. A few years prior to that, Jeffrey Calderon, one of the younger sons of Thomas Calderon, was killed. Again, speaking to the Taurians' desire to create peaceful interactions with their neighbors, the Taurians and the Magistry of Canopus had established a treaty to develop the worlds between them, known as the Franc Reaches. Basically, where, if you're familiar with HBS Battletech's Regan Reaches, it's kind of where the Franc Reaches were.
Mm-hmm.
And the Franc Reaches, or the colonial region at the time, grew upset about how the Magistry and the Taurian Concordat were handling things, and Jeffrey Calderon and Emma Centrella of the Magistry agreed to meet with Sun Tzu Liao to help calm down the colonial region. Sun Tzu was unavoidably detained on business of state, and the other two, Emma Centrella and Jeffrey Calderon, were kidnapped by colonials who wanted freedom from the Magistry of Canopus and the Taurian Concordat, and they wanted their own nation. And the rescue mission sent by Sun Tzu rescued Emma Centrella, but unfortunately Jeffrey Calderon died during the rescue, which is rather suspicious because he opposed Sun Tzu and the Capellan Confederation's growing influence in the Trinity Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey's death left the Taurian Concordat with the crisis of succession. He did not have any known heirs at the time, so a General Schraplin took over the protectorship, and then and Jeffrey's girlfriend, lover.
Paramore.
Yes, she had a son who is technically Jeffrey's heir, and a number of people wanted to put him on the throne, but he was a newborn babe, so most Taurians didn't.
Regency it is.
Well, they wouldn't even agree to a regency.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, no. The Taurian Concordat was being ruled by a military junta at this point.
Oh, right, of course. Yes, I recall that now.
Yeah, and they were, much like any military junta, they're very much focused on external threats and order and not particularly interested in the rule of law.
Yeah, they are focused outward as opposed to inward.
Yeah, this junta was basically held in power by all the bad things happening during the jihad, the asteroid hitting the planet, the jihad itself, the war to restore the Pleiades cluster to the Taurian Concordat, but another general was like, you know what, this boy is the true heir. The Taurian Concordat has lost its way into this military junta. We're declaring him the heir. We're setting up a regency, and we're going to this planet to do it. And that split the Taurian Concordat into the Taurian Concordat and the Calderon Protectorate. And all that leads up to where we are now. The son of that child is coming into his own majority in the 3150s, and he and the daughter of not the original general who created the junta, but the general who became his successor in the junta, he has a daughter, and those two are getting married, and it's going to restore the Taurian Concordat, bring both halves of the nation back together in 3151, I believe, is the date the wedding is set for.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we get some restoration for the Taurian Concordat in the Il Clan era.
It's going to be real busy once 3150 hits.
Yeah, it will be really nice to see the periphery as a whole just really get strengthened as not only a faction, but as players, because personally I really feel like, yes, the Concordat and the Magistry of Canopus have been much more active over the previous decades, but in general, the periphery is, I think, much more powerful than people give it credit for. And yes, it doesn't have as many planets as we've talked about before, but it still has very good capabilities, and it would be nice to see it grow, and ostensibly long term, because this is a universe that we want to last beyond our lifetimes. I would like to see the inner sphere grow to include the periphery and have new periphery states pop up further down, but that's probably in like the 30 somethings, you know,
the 3300s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that to some extent with the Clan Snow Raven and the Outworlds Alliance unifying into the Outworlds Alliance.
Mm-hmm. Which feels more like a successor state than it does an actual periphery state.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about the Raven Alliance. That's going to be a good time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The Magistry of Canopus and the Capellan Confederation have grown much closer together. They're not a single nation yet, but they're
It could happen.
Yeah, the Taurians reuniting would make them a major player again. Got the Franc Reaches now. We've got, what's their names? They were the Periphery March of the Federated Sons.
Oh.
Why can't I think of their name?
Tasarna.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't remember the name.
They're out there. The Marian Hegemony's big. Yeah, there's a few others that have cropped up. There's one to the periphery edge of the Lyran Commonwealth, who now the Lyran Commonwealth's pretty weak.
Yeah, the Rimworld's Republic's more or less back, just actually being themselves instead of an Amaris plaything.
And then we've heard of the Hanseatic League.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Out
yeah, I
in the
think
deep
you get
periphery.
your wish, Brent.
Well, the Hanseatic League's gone now. They're part of the Scorpio Imperium now, as of...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Battle for Terra, the fall of the Republic of the Sphere, Age of the Il Clan, whatever you want to call it. It's an exciting time for everyone, but I think it's especially exciting for fans of the periphery because we're finally getting the attention this region deserves.
Mm-hmm. And in a positive way as opposed to a negative way with the SLDF.
Yes. Although, should the Il Clan decide to crush the periphery under its boot heel, I believe the Taurians will once again give them everything they can handle and then some.
Well, I believe it is well established that the Taurians always give as good as they get.
Yeah, so that's it for me.
Our sources for today are Sarna, Battletech Battlemech Manual, Master Unit, Primitives Volume 4, TRO 3075, and Record Sheet 3075 Unabridged.
And our data dive comes out of the Periphery, volumes 1629 and 1692 by FASA.
We are supported by our Patreons at patreon.com/on the Origin of Battlemechs. Our social media on Twitter is at Origin of Mechs. We also have a dedicated channel on the Everything Battletech Discord. Feel free to stop by and say hi. If you have any questions, requests for topics, or wish to contact us, our email is ontheoriginofbattlemechs@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, I encourage you to let your friends know about us and to leave a review. Special thanks to my friend Laura for the intro and outro. Class dismissed. Everybody have a great day.
Peace out, Mech Warriors.
Stay safe out there.
Module complete. System standby. Would you like to load the next module?
Our sources for today are Sarna, Battletech Battlemech Manual, Master Unit List, my cat knocking some stuff over, Primitives Volume 4,